Okay. Once again, good morning, Pittsburgh Right-of-Way Group. The presentation is the locational value of a natural gas lease. What we're going to talk about today is, aside from the obvious, what's a natural gas lease worth? People are going to be concerned about how much gas is down below the surface. And people are going to also be concerned about the regulatory issues that can help or hinder the production of natural gas from that lease. We're not going to talk about either of those things. We're going to talk about some common sense things that people know about but don't always remember. So when we're valuing residential property, we know we're looking at certain things that are a lot different than valuing commercial property, and again, a different set of issues when we're valuing industrial properties. For a natural gas lease, very different, but at the same time, location, location, location. That does make a difference. So we're going to talk about some things that do make a difference with regards to the location of the lease and the aspects of the surface. One of the funniest phrases I can remember when I started working in the field, and this is 42 years in the business, my first 12 years were in the field. I have a little bit of credibility when I'm talking about some of these things. I have an affinity for the Pittsburgh Right-of-Way Group. I did a lot of land work myself in the seismic exploration, some right-of-way stuff and things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about, some things that you're familiar with and some things that you're not. When we're considering the value of this lease, can the developer have surface access to the property? How many streams are we going to cross? What kind of roads are we going to bring in there? What kind of vehicle traffic? That is, if we do have maximum access to the lease, that's a positive thing. But we also have to determine what's constraining our access to the lease. In addition to that, we also have to talk about the ability to get a well pad on the property. Why? Because that's going to enhance the value of that property. It's going to mean more money for royalty owners, probably. It's certainly going to mean more money for the surface people. These unconventional well pads need 7+ acres now. It's a big consideration. And what are the costs to build roads into this lease? You know, are we talking about a paved road? Are we talking about a large gravel road? Does it require guardrails? So many things have to do with just access and the surface. I put some photographs on these in this presentation. Some of them are for fun. For example, you can see the two gentlemen rappelling. I actually did have to rappel to several of my job sites. And I have worked on leases that look like that top right picture with the mountain terrain. These are considerations we have to be able to deal with. Another consideration with regards to the lease that is beyond a lot of people's thoughts is access to pipeline infrastructure. Where is your lease in proximity to interstate pipelines and gathering pipelines? What kind of access do you have? How many pipelines? Because each pipeline is going to go to a different place. It's going to access a different market. Can you access a pipeline that's not experiencing any slippage problems? Is it further than the closer pipeline that's going to be less costly to connect to, but maybe more expensive because you've got pipeline repairs and you've got a mess to get through just to get to that closer pipeline? So these are certainly considerations when it comes to cost of connecting to pipelines. These three pictures represent, these three pictures could have you thinking about dozens of questions and thoughts about the particular lease. The picture on the left, that's naturally a pipeline right-of-way. Can you imagine if your gas lease was on top of that mesa and you had to build that pipe? That's going to be a lot less valuable lease than that pipeline right-of-way that we're seeing in the right side of the picture of the screen. Looks like we're going through a cornfield there in relatively low relief. You know, what kind of roads are we dealing with there? Are we just negotiating the cost of a bushel of corn? And then finally, the picture in the middle. What are some additional issues there? Can you imagine that there's going to be some revenues to deal with because you're selling a lot of lumber, a lot of timber in that middle picture, besides having issues with some serious relief? So there's some pluses and minuses in all three of those. When we're talking about accessing pipelines, this natural gas that's produced from the lease that we're talking about has to enter into a gathering line before it's going to enter into an interstate system. Are we going into a high or low pressure gathering line? There's certainly a great deal of difference. If we're going into a low pressure line, then we probably don't need to add compression. And these compressors they start at $50,000 for these small systems. But the nice thing about low pressure systems is you can use plastic pipe, PVC, for connecting the wellhead over to the gathering system. A lot of these low pressure gathering systems are now made with PVC, and they can withstand up to 450 pounds. It's very usable. Wouldn't it be nice if your leases only had to deal with plastic pipe? But if you're going into a high pressure system, you're going to spend some money. Tapping into a high pressure system requires more expensive pipe. You're going to have to use steel pipe. You're going to have an M&R station that's dealing with higher pressure. Meter and regulation, that's what M&R stands for. We are seeing the cost of these M&R stations increase rapidly. In less than 4 years, the cost of an M&R station is more than doubled. We're seeing now tapping into these gathering systems. If you've got to build pipe over to them, we're going to pay about $1 million a mile for getting over to these low pressure gathering lines if we're going to use PVC. And that's the cost of labor, and compression is eating us up there. But when we're talking about tapping into a high pressure system, we're talking at least $3.5 million to tap that interstate pipe and that high pressure pipe and add the M&R station. This page is to take a sip from your coffee cup. And by the way, Johnny, I hope that you're making this available to everybody. I don't know how that works, but I know that you have a copy of this. So the membership certainly should have a copy of this. The two kinds of development from this lease could be either conventional or unconventional. I'm not going to educate anybody here on that. I think everybody here knows what we're talking about, but there's some attributes with regards to both that sometimes we don't think about. We know that shallow wells are going to be producing at lower pressures. These conventional wells they can be up to 4,000 or 5,000 feet down, some as far as 6,000 feet, but in the Appalachian Basin, usually anywhere from 400 feet to 4,000. These are lower pressure. So we need to understand what kind of gathering system we could be making gas into. How far is it from the wellhead or from the lease? What's the condition of the right-of-way? Because are we going to need to build a road? Are we going to have access to the entire length of the right-of-way from the wellhead to the pipeline that we're trying to connect to? Our pipeline is going to determine some cost to get to it. When we're bringing conventional production into this gathering system, our costs are going to be a lot lower. When we're talking about unconventional shale development, we're talking about higher pressures. So we're probably talking about going into a larger gathering system. And once again, we still have the same questions. How far is the gathering pipeline from the wellhead? And how far is it from the lease? What's the condition of the right-of-way? Did somebody have a question? Okay. Feel free to interrupt me anytime. The unconventional well production is huge. These wells can make 10,000 times more gas per day than a conventional well. We have to be able to accommodate this huge production. What degree of pressure regulation is required? These regulators have different cost structures depending on the volume that's going to come through them. Can the developer cover these added costs? We have to understand these things. Now, this isn't our bailiwick. This isn't necessarily our job function, but we're all in this together. So that's why these questions and answers are coming up for the right-of-way group, just to touch base with issues that people don't talk about too much. Now I'm going to talk about the dollars. How do the different markets make a difference to us when we're valuing these leases? Well, is the production going to make it to a local steel mill right down the road? Is the production going to be moved on a pipeline hundreds of miles away to another type of a market? Maybe it's a fertilizer plant or another steel mill. Or did the marketing group connected with this gas production successfully acquire pipeline capacity to move it 1,000 miles down to the Gulf Coast? Because we know that the LNG market's picking back up again. By the way, good news, ladies and gentlemen, we now have evidence that 5 LNG shipments are headed to China from the United States. So that's going to support and lift prices here. So it's great if you have capacity to get that gas to the coast for liquefaction. Or maybe this production is going to be sold locally, right into the utility for the residential and commercial load. So these different markets that I've just described that you see on this screen have different levels of demand. In other words, daily requirements. They're going to be interrupted differently because they may have issues. Maybe the market's only served on a gathering pipe and not an interstate pipe, and there could be some freeze-off issues. There's scheduled and unscheduled maintenance with regards to these markets, and other things that can cause delays or added costs. And finally, if the gas has no home, if we can't get this gas on this lease to a market, then the lease has no value at all. So naturally, we look to tie these leases to markets, to customers that are going to burn this gas. If you don't know how to get this gas from the lease to the customer that's going to burn it, you're not going to have any value at lease at all. But we are always looking at these lease ways. That's why I was talking about which pipeline's closer, which pressure is higher, which pressure is lower. Do we need added compression? Do we need longer roadways? It's all expensive. So the pipelines do compete with each other because they have different markets on them. I like to use the example of the Appalachian Basin because when we have these two sister pipes, Columbia Gas Transmission and Dominion Energy Transmission, they overlap. They overlap in several places. They run alongside each other. They cross each other, but rarely do they interconnect. And they almost certainly never serve the same markets unless the particular market has spent a lot of money to connect to both pipelines. That's for another discussion. That does happen. But what we have to understand is, does this lease lie in close proximity to multiple interstate pipelines? Because that gives us choices. That gives us cost structure choices, and that gives us market choices. So what are the opportunities for selling the new production into these pipelines? What are there steel mills on this pipeline and only residential load on the other pipeline? We have to know these things. And surely we're going to try to connect to the closest pipe, right? So can the closest pipe accept this gas? Because you didn't even remember to ask the pipeline if they can take this gas, if you can connect to it. Well, that's not our job, but it's somebody's job. So these overlapping pipelines do deliver to different markets. So you might have a lot of gas under that lease, but if you can't get that lease to the right market, you're going to be losing money. I got two pictures here, a hot dog shop on the top and a factory on the bottom. Again, that hot dog shop's not going to burn as much gas as that factory. So we have to do some planning before we even bother with that lease. And then finally, are we selling to hot dog shops or are we selling to steel mills? And so that's going to determine the volume that we're going to be able to move off of that lease to the customer. But how much money per decatherm, how much money do we get per unit on each pipe? And does one pipeline cost less to tap into than another pipeline? The answer to that is yes. Those costs vary from pipe to pipe and from season to season. And what are the different downstream markets? Again, I can't drive that home enough. If you're going to connect to the wrong pipeline, you're going to find out the hard way when those revenues don't look so good. This screen is very busy. This new screen. This is a snapshot from a few days ago of how the market had opened. These are dollars per decatherm. A decatherm is 1 million BTUs, and that's how gas is measured on the interstates. Top left, Henry Hub, that's our benchmark down in Louisiana. So May 2020, our prompt month, the market opened at $1.79.9. If you look over to the right, the basis for Dominion is negative 36.5 cents. That means that if Henry Hub's at $1.80, the Dominion pipeline's only worth $1.43. Further to the right, the basis for Columbia is a lot less. It's only negative 26.3 cents. So when you can fetch $1.43 a unit on Dominion, it's $1.54 a unit on Columbia. What's the difference? The difference is pipeline constraints. The difference is the amount of storage on each pipe. The difference is the markets on these pipes, but mostly it's pipeline constraints and the ability to get gas across that pipeline with the right capacity to the market. So as busy as this sheet is, make sure that you understand, look at 2020, 2021, 22, notice how seasonally the prices go up and down. Notice how the basis goes up and down and that it's different for each pipeline. Just on these two pipelines alone, the basis spreads out to more than 20 cents a decatherm between Dominion and Columbia. Did you choose the right pipeline? That's what I'm getting at. Maybe Dominion transmission was closer to your lease, but your revenues are going to be higher on Columbia. So to summarize this, we want to make sure that we understand that besides the proven reserves, the amount of gas that's determined underneath that lease, and besides the regulatory issues that can help or hurt your ability to develop that lease, there's plenty of factors that will determine the value of the lease. The level of access to the lease, for siting the necessary plant. What is the necessary plant? Connecting pipelines, compressor stations, outbuildings, dehydration facilities. Are you going to frack that well? Are you going to frack on that lease? Well, you're going to need a lot more than 7 acres, right? Access to gathering systems and the cost of compression, a serious factor. Access to interstate markets after you've gotten to that gathering system, and the separate cost of M&R station installation. They're different on each pipe. The varying levels of demand and revenue amongst regional pipelines, because one pipeline is going to go to a different set of markets than another pipeline. Those pipelines have different cost structures. That's their tariff. The pipeline tariff and additional cost structure is the basis. Remember, we looked at that spreadsheet. Basis to Dominion from Henry Hub is different than basis to Columbia from Henry Hub. these are some issues that I wanted people to think about in the right-of-way group, because the lease can be beautiful and have a lot of gas under it, but can be in a very nasty place. That's it. Questions?
David, Grant Stacks here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
How you doing, buddy? Nice to see you.
I'm virus-free and sober.
Oh, I can believe one of the two. I'm just kidding. How do states tax these? If they're running through multiple states, would it behoove them to go through maybe a more tax-friendly state or not? Does that affect the price? I was always curious about that, and I figured this is now a good time to ask.
The only taxes I'm familiar with are your capital tax on plant, and so that's a small issue. That's not a consideration. There's no sales taxes, because that particular type of tax is a function of the end user and the final destination of the gas. So the tax structure that we'd care about with regard to your question would only be the capital tax that each state charges per the amount of plant. You simply are talking about how many millions of dollars worth of plant you have in that state, and you pay an annual capital tax. That is not my area of knowledge. Any other questions? Did any of this not make sense? Is this too much information? Everybody's quiet and smiling. Johnny, you did a good job.
Hey, David, one question is when like Dominion or Columbia, when these pipelines do cross or gas is shared between them, is that a different process, or is that just an internal thing between, company A and company B?
That's an internal thing. That's a good question. That's an internal thing between the two pipelines. Those are called, what they'll do is put in place an operational balancing agreement, and in their approved language, their contract will allow them to transfer gas back and forth to each other for pressure issues, emergency balancing. Sometimes the customers have imbalances that are created on one pipe and need to be transferred to another, but it's rarely a customer activity. It's almost always an operational balancing agreement between the two pipelines. Mm-hmm.
Hey, David, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Alex McElroy here.
Hi, Alex.
Can you see me too?
I sure can.
Okay, it's not showing me myself. Anyway.
Comb your hair.
Yeah. Two questions. It's like one of these presidential press conferences. First question is, when you said you should, if you're connecting to a pipeline, you should find out what that pipeline is serving. If it's serving, a hot dog stand or the factory, is that something the pipeline companies, if you called them up and said, I'm looking to connect?
No, the pipeline company is not going to help you whatsoever. You have to do your research. So let's start from the beginning. There's a lease, and you're going to find out what the pipeline infrastructure is all around it before you even bother leasing this property. The developer thinks that there's plenty of gas down below. Should he even bother? Not until he looks at that pipeline map. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if one pipeline is only a utility pipeline for residential and commercial load, then that developer is going to sell that gas to a marketer. But that developer, if he's connecting to a pipeline that's moving gas to a steel mill, the developer might sell the gas him or herself and through an internal marketing function, and take advantage of a better volume and better price. Second question.
Okay, excellent. And then second question is, this is just a bigger, just general market question, is the thought is that with the lower oil prices that we're going to see less natural gas production off those prices. And since I read your newsletter, just wanted to get your thoughts. I think it might be interesting to some of the members here or everyone. If you see that affecting natural gas prices themselves here in the future. I know it'll take some time.
It is going to take some time, but I definitely am looking for natural gas prices to be supported by the demise of shale oil exploration in shale. So let me unpack that sentence. In North Dakota and West Texas, for example, there has been incredible development going on for oil. And when you bring in oil up out of the ground, associated natural gas comes with it, associated unwanted natural gas. So not only is our market flooded by hydrofracturing the Appalachian Basin and other shales for natural gas, but our market is oversupplied by all this associated natural gas with the shale oil or the oil play from shale. Now, oil's collapsed thanks to our friends, the Saudis, and people are shutting in, people are taking these rigs down, and there's going to be a lot less oil development in North Dakota and West Texas. That means less associated gas, meaning less unwanted gas is entering the market, which will support prices, tighten the market up a little, and hopefully, along with the China LNG shipments, raise prices. There's just too much oil on the market. There's too much gas on the market. Outside of the demand destruction we were seeing from the coronavirus, we still have too much gas and oil right now. The United States is producing at incredible rates, and the Saudis and the Russians are reacting.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? And by the way, I miss my land job. I miss being in the field. I got to use things like microfiche, and the young folks don't even know what I'm talking about. Pulling them big old 30-pound books off of these shelves that are 7 feet high in these old dusty courthouses or whatever they're called. I missed that work, and going in the field and talking to the ranchers.
Yeah, we still have to do that stuff with the books. Microfilm.
Oh, okay. Well, microfilm, yeah. Microfiche is a little bit different. FICHE. It's a little bit different. Yeah. It's a pain in the ass when you're trying to read a map using it.
David, can you hear me?
I can.
It's Michael Lopez. You've done a great job with this presentation. Appreciate it. You're talking about the cost of and so forth. I just wanted to bring up a variable that is an undetermined cost, and that is a landowner. I mean, right now, with the cost of oil and gas going down, at least as a marketable source, when you're putting a pipeline in, the variable of a landowner, the cost of each landowner is unpredictable. So to put a pipeline on somebody's property, it's kind of keep up with the Joneses kind of situation anymore. As they become more knowledgeable, the cost goes up because they're going to hold out. And a reroute, I've done $1 million reroutes because of struggles with landowners that don't want to negotiate or don't want a pipeline on their property.
Absolutely. And I didn't go into great detail. Thank you, Michael. I didn't go into great detail about that at all because I simply wanted to stress access across